I'm Dr. Rich. Today I'm going to talk about silver fillings. Today I'm going to talk about what a silver filling is, what it's made out of, how it's placed, how it's mixed up, how it comes packaged, how it sets up, how it's adjusted, and how it's disposed of. I'm also going to tell you in what situations I still place silver fillings. I'll also go over the pros and cons of silver fillings, and I'll also tell you a little bit about what material has replaced silver fillings in most dental offices nowadays. Alright, so silver fillings are also called amalgam fillings. The chemical definition of amalgam is a mixture of mercury and some other metals. So the silver fillings come in these pre-packaged capsules. Inside the capsules, there's some powdered metal and a little pouch of mercury. Powdered metal consists of about 56% silver, 28% tin, 15% copper, and then some traces of indium and zinc. Those percentages are true for the brand of amalgam that I use. The brand I use is called Permite, and it's made by a company called Southern Dental Industries, and they're down in Australia. Other brands of dental amalgam will have different percentages. Some might be a little bit higher in copper, some might be a little bit lower in copper, some might have less silver, but they're all in the same ballpark. Silver fillings have been around for quite a long time. The basic mixture that's used today has been in use for over 150 years. Silver fillings are very popular at one time because they were very durable, they're very easy to place, they're very forgiving to place, and they're very quick to place as well. Much more so than the white fillings that have replaced them. So this is the current amalgam mixing machine that I use. It's my newest one. Looks fairly modern with the smooth touchpad and the digital display. It is fairly old though. I think it's from around 1995, mid-90s, somewhere in there. It's actually on the bottom, it says made in Austria. As you can see, it's got a plastic cover over top of the mixing arms. This way, when you put the capsule in, close the lid, it won't let the mixer turn on without the lid being closed. It's a safety feature, so in case the capsule comes loose from the arm, the lid will keep it from shooting and flying all over the room. And there it turns on. And it's got different settings for different amount of time, fast shake, slow shake. Some of the cements that we use in dentistry need to get mixed on a machine like this as well. So nowadays, I'll use it occasionally for silver fillings, but majority of the time I'm using it to mix up cements when I'm cementing crowns. I also have a slightly older version, well, not slightly, maybe 20-30 years older version of this machine that I'll show as well. You can see the differences between this more modern one and the older version. This is a really old amalgam mixing machine that I had. I dug this out of the back of the storage closet. As you can see, this one doesn't have a little protective covering over the arms that hold the capsule, but it still works. It's pretty old though. As you can see, it's all metal construction, front, top, sides, even the back. You can see it's made in Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein? It's made in Liechtenstein. Pretty old. I'm gonna guess this one maybe dates back to the 1970s, possibly even the late 1960s. I think I'm going to stick it back in the closet now. So here's a typical setup of the instruments that I would use to place a silver filling. First, I have a stone model here in which I've cut a little cavity preparation just so I have something to place the filling in as a demonstration. We have the amalgam capsule. So this contains powdered metals plus a little pouch of mercury, and it's in the proper proportions. In the old days, prior to these pre-made capsules, dentists would actually take a little puck of the powdered metals and then have to dispense the proper amount of mercury. Prior to these pre-made ones, they had reusable capsules, so they would add the components in, close the capsule, put it in the mixing machine. The really old way of doing it would just be to mix it with a mortar and pestle. This is the amalgam well. This is where I put the amalgam material once it's first mixed. This instrument is the amalgam carrier. I use this to pick the amalgam up out of the well and transport it to the tooth. These next two instruments are called amalgam condensers. So these are used once the material is in the tooth. This is used to condense it, basically pack it tightly into the cavity. So you fill the cavity up in layers and you overbuild it. Once it's full, then you use these next instruments with their carvers, and these are used to trim the filling back. And of course we have my trusty old amalgam mixing machine in the background. This particular brand of amalgam that I use requires 8 seconds at a fast speed. Okay, so let's get started. So first you press the plunger down, that pierces the little pouch of mercury. Put the capsule in the arms, close the lid, hit the start button, and you wait the 8 seconds. Okay, take the capsule out of the arms, open the capsule up, and out pops a little blob of amalgam. Take your amalgam carrier and pick some up. Basically, you just press it into the blob and some of the material gets forced into it. Bring it over to the tooth, press down, and it squeezes some out. Then you take your condenser and pack it in. Make sure you get into all the nooks and crannies. Alright, so now we move on to the next layer. At this point in time in the mix, the amalgam will stick to itself. So you can keep building it up in layers. And each layer you got to condense down, squeeze it in. Alright, I think one more layer will do it. There we go. Once the amalgam starts to set up, it won't stick to itself anymore. So at that point, if you're not finished, you gotta remove what's in the tooth and start over from scratch. Alright, so now we overfilled it. And now we take the carvers and we start trimming it back. And that just basically, when you're trimming it back, I'm going to use the other carver, you're trying to recreate the shape of the tooth surface that was there prior to you removing it with the drill, or prior to the cavity taking care of it. And once you have your rough shape in, at this point in time, if this was a real person, I'd get some articulating paper. That's the blue carbon paper. Place it on the tooth and ask the person to bite down a few times. If the filling was still high, it would leave a blue spot and I would be able to trim it away. So that's that. And then all the scrap amalgam that's left over in the amalgam well, and even all the stuff that gets trimmed, usually that gets suctioned out of the person's mouth, that all gets disposed of in a recycling container and sent off to the amalgam recycling facility. Nowadays, if you're someone like me who's in their 40s or older, you probably have some silver fillings still in your mouth. Mine were replaced back when I was a teenager, and they're still going strong. I think I've had 2 replaced over the years, but the rest are still alright. That was one of the beauties of silver fillings. If it was just the right size filling, not too big, not too small, they tend to last for a long time. Too small, and then the filling is more likely to crack. Because the silver filling material is kind of brittle, if it's not thick enough, it won't be very strong, and you bite down on something hard and it'll crack and fall out. Same thing if the filling is too big. While it'll work fairly well in that situation, it won't last quite as long because that's too much of the material is, there's usually not enough tooth to help it stay in place. Now what I mean by there's not enough tooth to help stay in place, silver fillings don't stick to the tooth. You know, the more modern white fillings that we use will actually bond to the tooth. You basically glue them in so they stay in. With a silver filling, we have to cut the tooth in such a way that it's wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. That type of shape will mechanically lock the filling into the tooth so it won't fall out on its own. Downsides of that though is that that type of preparation, you have to cut away more tooth. So let's talk about the pros and cons of silver fillings. Some of the pros, it's very quick to place, very simple to place. It's not a very technique sensitive material. The material itself is not super sensitive to moisture. So nowadays, silver fillings have kind of fallen out of favor, and most dentists nowadays will place a white filling instead. Big reason is that white fillings look like tooth. It's much prettier looking material as opposed to a silver filling, which can, if it's big enough, it can make the tooth kind of look dark from the side. And then also the silver in the silver filling will tarnish over time, and so the filling itself will start to turn black. You can get rid of that by having your dentist polish it, but most people don't bother to do that anymore. Pros and cons of silver fillings compared to white fillings. So a silver filling is much simpler to place than a white filling. There's not as much other equipment that's needed. For a silver filling, you cut the tooth, clean it, dry it, sometimes use a matrix band, put the filling in, trim it, check the bite, and it's good to go. A white filling, you got to keep the tooth clean. You got to clean the tooth, you got to dry it off, and you have to keep it very dry while you're placing the filling. Any little bit of moisture that gets onto the tooth while you're placing a white filling, the white filling will fail prematurely. Silver fillings are a little bit less sensitive to moisture, so while you don't want to place a silver filling underwater, if a little bit of moisture gets in there, a little bit of water, it's not the end of the world. Should last just as long. I've already talked about the looks different. Another difference is how much tooth you have to cut away to place a filling. With a white filling, because we can actually bond it, which means glue the filling to the tooth, we just drill away the part of the tooth that's infected, the cavity, the caries, as dentists say. Just drill that away and we replace it with the white filling material. Silver fillings, because they don't actually stick to the tooth, there's no bond involved, you have to actually cut the tooth a little bit more so. You got to cut the tooth in a shape so that it's wider at the base and narrower at the top. That locks the filling in to the tooth so it doesn't fall out. So with that, nowadays I place mostly white fillings, but there are still some situations where I'll tell the patient, you know what? Let's do a silver filling. It's going to be better for you. It's going to last longer. Those situations are if a patient has an old crown that has a cavity around it. In certain spots, it's pretty easy to reach the cavity, and if it's not a big cavity, I can just drill the cavity away, clean it up, and patch the crown. So these old crowns generally were made out of gold, either yellow gold or a white gold with porcelain on top. Gold and white gold, white fillings will not stick to the metal. So in those situations, I will use a silver filling instead. Otherwise, we'd have to replace the entire crown. Another situation is if a patient has a cavity on a tooth very far in the back and it's just difficult to reach. Say it's the very last tooth and they have a strong gag reflex, they just salivate a lot, and it's just difficult to reach. On back teeth, very far in the back, especially on the cheek side, it's difficult at times to get all the equipment I need to use to be able to place a white filling in that spot. Again, I'll tell the patient, listen, let me put a silver filling, no one's ever going to see it, and it's going to last you much longer than a white filling would in that situation. Lastly, I'll place a silver filling if somebody comes in with a cavity that goes very far under the gum. If it goes far under the gum, usually what needs to be done is a procedure called a crown lengthening, where I refer the patient to the periodontist, the gum specialist, and they basically lower the gum so that cavity now will be above the gum. A lot of people don't like the idea of going in for an extra surgical procedure. Adds expense, adds some discomfort. So occasionally in a situation like that, I'll say, all right, well, if you don't want to do the crown lengthening, let's try a silver filling. Again, because it's so far under the gum, it's very difficult to keep the tooth, the cavity prep, dry and clean that far under the gum. With a white filling, if it's not kept dry and clean, white filling is going to fail. A silver filling is going to be more forgiving in that situation. It will still eventually fail, but it won't fail as quickly. All right, thank you so much for watching. I hope everybody learned a little bit about silver fillings. If there's any other dental topic you'd like me to talk about, please leave a comment below. And give me your thoughts on silver fillings. Do you have any silver fillings left in your mouth? Do you still get silver fillings placed? Does your dentist place silver fillings? Or have you gone and have all your silver fillings replaced with white fillings? Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and hit that like button. I try to have new videos out about every week or so.